So here we go. Let's model this chair, and if this is kind of like your first time modeling in Maya, I'm going to gear this towards the beginners because this chair is actually a very simple model. It's easy to make. It's a beginner levels thing, and I'm going to go ahead and take my time and explain all the little tools and all the steps. So if you're a beginner, fear not, you're in the right place. So let's get started. You'll see two chairs identical, side by side, and the one on this side you can see has a lot more polygons, and the one this side is very simple in geometry. And you can see it's separated into multiple pieces because they are multiple pieces. If I hit 1 on my keyboard, you can see I have just turned off subdivision preview. So right now this is its true form. If you hit Shift I on any object, it isolates that object that you have selected. So right now you can see this is what this singular object looks like by itself without any interference, so you can focus on it. And you can see that it's just a very simple base of the chair, or the seat of the chair. And if I hit 3, I can see what this would look like once I start smoothing it. But right now it's not actually applying a real smooth polygon operation on it. So for example, if you go to mesh and you go to smooth, that's actually making it, you're actually making it smooth. So if I do it one more time, keep your eye on this sharp corner, hit G for repeat command, and hit G one more time. You can see it is actually the exact same thing as the preview version of the low poly. So let's Control Z a bunch of times to go back to our original. And we're back. Hit 3, and that is what the final result will look like after like 3 smooth operations. Okay, so this is very useful. I constantly use 1 and 3 to switch between previews of the original polys and the actual what a smooth polygon operation would make the model look like. If you hit 2, you can see both at the same time, but I don't really. You can see the bounding box of the unsmooth version, like right here. I don't really use this that much. It's I just hit 1 or 3 usually, and that tells me everything that I need to know. So you see this icon right here? That is isolate selected. You can either click this, or you can do Shift I, or you can set up your hotkeys any way you want. Maya is all customizable. And then we have this piece right here. If you hit 3, you can see what the original poly object looks like, and you have this, and the support of the chair seat, and you have the legs, of course. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move this to the side. I'm going to move this. I'm going to move both of these to the side. And I'm going to create this from scratch. So you can see step by step on how to create this exact chair on your own. There are plenty of, if you ever need design references, there are plenty of chair designs on Google or Google Images or Pinterest or anywhere. There's tons of free resources that if you're ever lacking in ideas, just simply go to one of those image sites, and then you will find lots and lots of great inspiration. So I don't know why, but for some reason this is transparent. So let's go to our default Lambert and let's make sure the transparency is off, right? And let's start off by making this thing right here. So I'm gonna duplicate it and I'm gonna shrink this. And I am assuming that you have a very basic knowledge of Maya, like you know how to navigate through Maya, you know how to manipulate objects, but in case you don't, let me just give you a really quick crash course. If you hold down Alt and you hold down the middle mouse button, you have pan, and still holding down Alt, you also, if you press your right mouse button, you have zoom in, zoom out, and then left mouse button is to tumble. If you press F, you focus on whatever object you are currently selecting, and then that would make sure that you are tumbling around it. Okay, so if you want to tumble around this object, you press F, Maya frames it to the center, and hold down Alt, left mouse, and you can tumble around it. This is middle mouse, right mouse is zoom in, zoom out, okay? Again, this is more of a beginner's modeling course, so I'm not going to get into too much details about the beginnings of, the most basic functions of Maya, which I assume that you can learn from many, many other free resources you can find on the web. Right now I want to teach you how you can get your Shapeways store established right away. Okay, so anyways, let's do this. Let's turn on shading, wireframe on shaded, because right now we don't see the wireframe unless we click on it, but now we do, and that way I can use this as a guide. All right, so it looks like we have 1, 2, 3. Okay, so let's start from here, not counting the bounding edges. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so let's do a insert edge loop. Also, this is a little hard to see, so let me turn down let's turn down the color a little bit so it's a little easier to see. And so we have this. By the way, I'm holding down space, and that brings up this context menu. And if I hit and hold my left mouse button, I can switch between all these different views. So perspective view, right view, bottom view, and so on. And this is the top view, of course. Okay, whoops, right. So let's add 2 more edge loops. I have a hotkey set for edge loop, which is Control L. But if you don't have a hotkey set, you could just go to Mesh Tools, Insert Edge Loop, right there. And I am right now just eyeballing this because what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to mirror this down the center. And I'm going to select these vertices. By the way, if you want to navigate between vertices, edges, or polygons, all you have to do is, okay, so for example, right now, pretend you have like nothing selected, okay? If you hit right mouse button, you have these 2 things, right? But we want to edit our polygon, so you select the polygon and then right click. And then you can see it's context dependent. So you have object mode, UV multi-face, vertex, and edge. I use vertex, edge, and face all the time. So right now I want to select vertexes, or vertices. So I go like that, and I select the vertices that I want, pull them out, pull them out, pull them out, and I have something that starts to look like what I have over here. Let's go back here, and I am hitting E. That's rotate. Actually, I don't need, I mean, R is what you want for scale. And notice that we have this thing going on here, so let's pull this back. Let's select those vertices, let's pull those back to give it nice and round. And now let's add 1, 2, 3 edge loops here, one here, one here, and one here. Now notice that this is flat, but this has the sides kind of tilting up. So let's go and select these vertices, and do the same. And notice I have this thing right here. If you look carefully, notice this section right here. It's like that little curvature you get on seats. You know, right here they kind of indents down for your legs, and then it kind of curves up a little bit. So we can simulate that just by, well, first let's create an edge loop here, and edge loop there. You know, before I do that, I want to explain something. Let's try taking this object, hitting 3, and seeing what we get. So if you'll notice, let's turn off wireframe on shaded for now. If you notice that we have a much more creased and well-defined edge here and here, but here it's just round, right? It's really round. And the reason for that is because of these edge loops. This edge loop right here and this edge loop right here. So I want you to pay close attention to what happens if I add an edge loop here. Okay, keep your eye on the curvature of this seat as soon as I release my mouse to confirm placement of this edge loop. Boom. It suddenly becomes much more well defined, right? Down here, the same thing. Watch. Keep your eye on the bottom edge. Boom. And ta-da. Now, this edge loop, watch what happens if I pull this edge loop up. Watch what happens to the angle of this, of these two polys. It smooths out, right? The higher I pull up, the smoother and rounder it gets. The more I push it down, the more defined it gets up to a certain point, and then it starts to screw up like here. Yeah, you don't want that. So you can start to get a concept of how Maya averages these polygons together to smooth things out. And this is actually it's a very nice feature, especially when you're doing any kind of modeling, you know, creatures or hard surfaces. You're going to be doing a lot of smoothing, and you need to know and develop a sense of where to put these edge loops, or where to define sharper corners, or if you want to shape certain objects. You have to start to practice modeling in a way that this will become second nature for you. Okay, so anyways, let's go back to adding this little hill, I guess you would call it. let's just take this and notice when I selected these two, something, this thing should be, this manipulator should be here, but it's not. So there is something that I selected in the back, and boom. So you always have to be careful when you do a marquee select. Now you can hold down Control to deselect it. There is an option for you to turn off. You could turn on the option that would select only what's facing the camera, what you see in the camera. But I actually don't find that to be very useful for most cases, because I like to be able to select back faces as well. Because then, for example, if I want to select this entire edge loop, I just go like this, and then I select everything there. What I don't want, I could just simply, if I hit Control, I can just do that and do that. Okay, so let's go ahead and give it a little hump right there. And this chair looks a little thick. Let's go down a little bit. Also keep in mind, right now we are making these little miniature dollhouse models. So this is the scale of the actual printed product. It's like about an inch and a half high. So this actually conforms to an official dollhouse scale standard. There are dollhouse scale standards, for example, 1/6, 1/12, 1/24, and so on. And there is a niche hobbyist market for these kinds of 3D printed props. So you could try to design for that market. You know, there are Facebook groups that of these dollhouse enthusiasts who do this for fun, and they're always looking for specialty props that are hard to find or hard to make. And a chair is actually not one of those things, I'll be honest with you, because a chair is relatively easy to make. But this is, for me, is my entry-level product. This is me just doing some tests. So eventually you're probably going to want to create something that's a little more unique, something more targeted towards the people in your target audience, or that's for films, or the people in your target market. You want to learn all you can about what they want, and you can create these products. The only thing I would say, and I'll get into this a little bit more detail later, is that Shapeways is actually relatively expensive. So $5 for a tiny little chair like this, not that many people are going to be willing to buy it. So unless it's something that they really can't find anywhere else, or they can't make themselves. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. Let's go back to this. All right, so we have this chair now. Okay, this is pretty much what I made here, and I want to keep. The reason I brought up the Shapeways things is because it's so small. Okay, Shapeways has its limitations in terms of the thickness of your object. If you make things too thin, it's not going to print out properly. It's going to crumble. You're going to get incomplete prints. It's going to be too fragile. So there is an integrity check inside Shapeways that I'll get to a little later. But for now, just keep in mind that you don't want to make things like paper thin like that. It would never print out properly inside Shapeways. Okay, so now this being done, let's make a couple of these chair legs, and all we have to do is use cylinders. This cylinder is a little too Right, that's what I want. It's a little too dense. I can just make it, let's say, 12. Let me just see, how many did I use here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, I'd use 12 here as well. So let's make this 12. Let's give it some subdivisions, and let's scale this down. Pull it up, scale it down, pull it up. You can actually, if you hit minus on your keyboard, notice the manipulator becomes smaller and you have more room to pull it up. And I'm going to teach you a little trick. If you hit insert, notice that this manipulator becomes this square icon thing, and then you can move the pivot point down here. Now I'm going to teach you another trick, one trick right after another. If you're a beginner, hold down V. V stands for vertex snap, and pop, pop, pop. It snaps right to the center bottom vertex of this. And now I'm going to teach you a third trick. If you hold down X, this is grid snap. So it snaps to the grid. So pop, pop, pop. So right now we know it is perfectly flush to 0 world space on the y-axis. So if we go to front view, where is our cylinder? Okay, if you can't see it, maybe we have to change. Let's go to view, select camera, change our far clip plane. Yeah, there we go. Notice it is an absolute 0 on the y-axis, and this is all actually really important if you're creating products, because you want to have things to be accurate if you're creating things according to scale. And you have, for example, measurement tools inside Maya starting from 0, 0y, so you know exactly how big things are. So right now, let's take this and take this leg, let's move it back here. And if you notice that in this model, I have it kind of slanted. So in that case, I should not have created all these subdivisions here, because if I slant it, notice it's interrupted like that. Okay, no problem. Let's just delete all these. So context menu, edge, double click, double click, double click, double click, double click. Okay, and then I'm holding down shift, right click, delete edge. These are all keyboard shortcuts that you should get used to, because it'll speed up your workflow immensely. Okay, so now we can start doing stuff like this. And I am just pulling these points back. Let's actually give it a little bit here and a little bit here. And right click back to object mode. Let's add an edge loop here. And let's pull this back this way. Okay. Now as you work, just make sure you take a look at your model from various angles. And make sure that everything is looking as you expect. Now I'm going to teach you a trick. Because we had just created this thing in this manner, what happens if we do we have to do the same thing for the other side? No, we can just duplicate, except we want to have it to be mirrored. Now notice we have all this messy data inside here. So what we want to do is we want to zero everything out here by using something called freeze transformations. Now watch what happens here after I freeze. Freeze. Now what we can do next is if we Control D or edit, duplicate, if we mirror along X, we have a perfect mirror image. Now here's the other thing. Notice I have to manually position this here. I'm going to show you another trick. If we have this thing, okay, I know much earlier we talked about making this thing perfectly centered, perfectly mirrored, right? So let's do that now. Let's delete 1/2. Let's oh, please tell me you're not going to crash. Okay, sometimes Maya makes me nervous. So make sure you save constantly. Okay, so let's take a look at the top view. Let's turn on grid mode. If you don't see the grid, again, make sure you select the camera. And sometimes, okay, so click this icon right here. And select far clip plane, add a couple zeros, and that area it should show up. Now I'm going to hit insert. Whoops, I'm going to hit insert, and I'm holding down V, snap the pivot to the center. I'm going to hit insert again to jump out. And actually I just noticed that this might not be perfectly straight. So I just selected all these vertices and I'm going to scale them to make sure that we have a perfectly straight edge along this axis. So when we do a mirror, it's going to be perfectly aligned. Now, since we just did that operation, let's hit insert again. Let's make sure it is still snapped to this point right here. It is. Control D, and oops, let's freeze this transform first. Modify freeze transforms. And you see all this is construction history. Sometimes it's good to delete by type history because the more the construction history builds up, the more you run into a risk of Maya crashing. You know, construction history is useful in that you can sometimes take, if you screw up way down the line, you can, you know, take X number of steps back and start again. But it's not exactly the most stable way of working. You know, sometimes Maya will just crash and you lose all your work. So if that's a concern, I would recommend you make copies of your model at each stage, or save different versions constantly as you work, so you can always have something to fall back on in case you need to start again at an earlier stage. Okay, so let's hit V, let's snap it to, actually I'm sorry, not V, though it worked for some reason there, X to snap it to the grid, right? And let's freeze transforms again. So now we know that if we mirror along this axis, we will have a perfectly symmetrical mirror image along X, and you see that is exactly what we get. Now we have these two identical halves. What we have to do is we have to join them together, because right now they're separate, right? I mean, if I hit 3 on one, this is, you can see they're different. Okay, Maya is, hold on a second, let me pause the video real quick. Okay, we're back. I had a little glitchy thing going on there. Okay. They're two separate objects, so we want to combine them. The way to combine them is to go into Mesh, Combine. Now they're combined, but they're not joined together. So if I do this, you see, they're actually not joined together, though they are combined. They're considered one single object. The vertices are not merged together yet. So I just selected all these vertices, and if I go into, you hit and hold Shift, right click, merge vertices, distance threshold. The higher this number, the more it's going to merge neighboring vertices. So for example, this is a really low number. And that means the vertices, this assumes that your vertices are already touching. So watch what happens if I make this 1. Keep your eye on here when I hit 1, enter. What in the stat is what happens when you make the distance threshold that high. So that's sometimes useful if you have vertices that are kind of far apart, but not quite, they're close enough, but they're not quite touching. You can slowly increase the distance threshold to make your vertices merge, but you'll have to watch out for other places like here where vertices are closer together. Maybe you don't intend for them to be merged. So it's always a good idea just to make sure that your geometry is clean, especially for these symmetrical combine operations, because it'll make your life a lot easier. Okay, so now notice that our object is properly joined together. It is one perfectly symmetrical piece, clean and beautiful. Okay, let's save real quick. Let's come back here. So let's position this here. Let's say here, because notice I have this base, which I'll make next, connects to this thing. So we can always position this a little bit, tweak this position a little bit later. So I'm going to teach you a little trick right now. Let's delete by type history. If you hit Control G, it creates a new group, and notice in the outliner you have this cylinder, and the pivot is still in its original place. But as soon as we hit Control G, it creates a new group, and by default Maya's group goes to world 000. So if we Control D, duplicate this and mirror it along X, we have a perfect mirror image of this, including its position. This is very useful. So that is another trick that I have taught you. Let's see. Let's make this piece, shall we? This piece is a little bit more complicated, but I'm going to break it down for you because I want you to be a successful modeler who makes a lot of money on Shapeways. All right, so how do we start with this? Any ideas? Bueller. Okay, so perhaps you have some ideas, perhaps not. I will show you what to do. There are any number of approaches to creating your models in Maya, not just one. I'm just showing you what works for me. But these tools and techniques that I show you can be used in any number of ways. Your only limit is your imagination. So let's create this cube and kind of match it like so. And I'm going to take this, create an edge loop there, create an edge loop there, create an edge loop here, create an edge loop there. And I'm going to, well, let's create an edge loop here as well, somewhere down the center. And then I'm going to take this and this, and this and this, and I'm going to do something called bridge. Actually, I'm not really sure if this is going to work. Let's see. Bridge. Yeah, that worked. We just bridged it. Okay, nice. Cool, right? You could also do this, which is a little slower, but if you create like a cube like that, and you could stretch it out like that, and you could, you know, create this, create that, create these edge loops, select these faces and extrude, and then you could, you know, you could mirror it. Along X, and then you could join it like so, but I mean, this was just so many more steps than it needed to be. But you could do it like this. Just once again showing you that there's more than one way to get to the result that you want. So here we go. We have this. Now we want to take these faces and if you go to Edit Mesh, Extrude, and there we have an extrusion. Now, for those of you who are more keen, you'll probably realize that this is not perfectly symmetrical, and you would be absolutely correct. So let's delete one half. If we hit Insert, hold down V, snap it to this point, Control D. Before we do that, let's modify freeze transformations. Control D. Scale along -1. And then with both objects selected, do a combine. Right mouse click, go to vertex. Select these vertices. Hold down left shift. Hold down right mouse, merge vertices. I am using a lot of keyboard shortcuts, but all the tools that you need are here in Mesh Tools, Edit Mesh, and Mesh. But I mean, if you're constantly going like this, looking for what you want, going like this, going like this, going like this, you can see it just takes a lot longer. So I encourage you, even though you're going to have a bit of a learning curve in the beginning, to really get used to these very useful context menus. You know, it's a lot of, you know, shift, hold down left or right mouse button, and then, you know, you have all your selections that you need right here. Okay, so now we have this. If we hit 3, notice this happens. How come when we hit 3, it doesn't look like this? Well, remember what I was teaching you about edge loops, right? If you hit 3, notice that here it just becomes like this mushy, kind of undefined, ill-defined thing that has really, it doesn't look anything like this. So let's take a look at this in detail. Notice this edge loop here, this edge loop here, 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 and here. Where I want things to be sharper, I put an edge loop closer to that area. So I want this corner to be sharper. Let's put an edge loop there, and notice immediately the changes that we get. So based on that, let's add one here, let's add one here, let's add one here. Look at that. Amazing, isn't it? Add one here, add one here, add one there, there. Oops. There we go. And the same thing here. Let's add all these necessary edge loops to get the definition that we want. And boom, look at that. They're really rounded right now because we are missing edge loops here and here. Now we have more or less the same thing. This seems to be a little, because this is thicker. Okay, so let's do that. All right, so let's also add an edge loop up here to define this area. Yeah, nice. This area also looks a little round, so let's add edge loops there, and here, and here, and here, and here. Boom. On the inside, there and there. Boom. Pretty fun, right? Let's move this back here. Move it into place. Let's expand it. Scale it. And there we go. Let's create, save your work. Let's create a cylinder. If you clicked this polycylinder right here and you go into subdivision axes, and you remember we used 12 before. Let's scale this down. Let's move it. Let's jump into top view. Hit 4. 4 is X-ray mode, and so we can move it to here. Go back to perspective view. Let's hit insert. Hold down V to snap it to this point. And let's hit X for grid snap. So again, it's perfectly snapped to the floor. Oh, I'm holding down Alt-B for background, so you can cycle through various backgrounds. All these colors are also customizable, but I won't get into that. Top view, let's go and hit 4 again. Yep. Hit space, bring up the context menu, left mouse, perspective view. Right click, vertex, pull it up, and let's do this. Let's notice how I have a little angle here. Let's do this. Let's move it forward like that. Maybe move it out a little bit like that. And it also seems a little bit too big in comparison to the back leg. But you know what? It's not so bad if you have legs a little bit thicker, because during my printout I realized that these legs were actually kind of flimsy at this scale, so maybe it's better to go a little thicker. Okay, so let's modify freeze transforms. Also, notice that it's important for these two surfaces to be intersecting because we want the 3D print to make this a single object. Also, let's scale this forward so it covers this part. Now let's hit 3 on this and notice we have the same problem as as before, when we're modeling this piece. So let's make sure we start adding edge loops to where we want definition. So I would add one there, a couple here. And it doesn't have to be perfect because in the end, we're sending this off to Shapeways. And as long as your geometry is clean, it doesn't have to be exact, because we're going to end up smoothing it a bunch of times anyways, like to this degree. And as long as your geometry is clean, it'll print out just fine. You just have to make sure that this is all connected and touching, so it'll print out as one solid piece. Okay, so let's group this. Remember that trick I taught you? Let's group this so the pivot goes back to 0, 0, 0. Let's Control D, scale it along X, and now we have a perfect mirror image. Here it's, we haven't, I've hit 3. We haven't defined our shape here that well yet, so let's add the edge loops that we want here, especially up here. Looks pretty good. Let's do this again. Let's move this out of the group. I just hit Shift P to move it out of the group. Let's group it again. Control D, scale -1, and save our work. And look at that, everything is looking really great. The last part is this piece right here. Now this is a lot of fun to make, so let me show you what I do. Make a cube. Let's give it some divisions. Let's see how many divisions. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. What? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So I did not have it exactly down this. Okay, well, if that's the way I did it before, then this will work. Let's give it a 1 across. Let's shrink it down, and this is the fun part. If you hit edge, double click. So if you go into right click edge and you hit you select one edge, if you double click it and it's a proper edge loop, it will select all the way around. So this edge loop is selected all the way around. And let's scale it out like that. Go to object mode, hit 3. Nice, right? But how do we get this curvature? We could just go in and do this and do this, etc. We could, but there's a much cooler way to do this, and that is to go into, if we go into this modeling menu and change it to animation, then we go into deform, nonlinear. Let's click this to break the menu off, and let's go to perspective mode. With this object selected, you hit bend. Okay. Now if you see this line up here, hit T, and these little blue diamonds appear. Now notice you can start to do this, but that's not the direction that we want. So if you hit E, notice what it's doing over here. To be precise, let's make it 90. And it looks like it was negative, right? So negative 90. And hit T again because this manipulator is still selected. And I am holding down the left or middle mouse button, doesn't matter, to change its curvature. Now notice if I select this object and hit W to move it, it's going to do this because the deformer object is stationary. If you want to move it together, you have to shift select this as well. Oh, well, that's not going to work. Okay, never mind. Control D, duplicate it, and that way this is no longer being influenced. This duplicate object is no longer being influenced by this right here. So we can move this into place, make sure it's touching the sides. This is a little thinner, but again, like I was saying, I learned the hard way that it's better to go a little thicker for scales of something like this, 1/24. And if we hit 3, and let's rotate it up a little bit. Nice solid contact. And there you go. We don't need this anymore. We can make this a little bit sharper by adding edge loops here and here. And look at that. Lovely, right? This chair is a little bit too... Okay, let's just bring it back here. And let's also shrink this, scale it back this way, take these two, bring them back there. I'd say a little, let's go a little bit more. I don't really like this thing sticking out, so let's scale it, bring it out a little bit so it's covering. Also, I noticed that this is a little higher. So we can select both of these legs and scale it down. Notice because our pivot point is down here, we are scaling from 0, 0y, so we don't have to worry about, you know, if you have, for example, your pivot right here, notice it does that, so you're going to be doing this, and that's really annoying. So this save you a lot of time. Let's move this down a little bit. Let's move it back so it's touching. Yeah. It's a little shorter than that, but that's okay. And we have a cute little minimalist chair now. Okay, so let's go ahead and delete the history here, and I'm going to finalize this by grouping it together, and let's make a backup. Duplicate this, and with all the objects selected, so I'm selecting all these objects, I'm going to go ahead and, okay, let's go back to modeling. I'm going to go ahead and combine all these objects together. And then hit 1. I'm going to smooth it. So smooth once, smooth twice, and let's take a look. You still have these jagged corners, so we won't need to smooth it one more time. There we go. So now this is pretty much what I had here. Though here it looks like I didn't smooth it as. This is actually a little bit more dense than that. So it's okay. We want something that is going to be fairly dense in geometry like this, but not overwhelmingly so for Shapeways, because Shapeways doesn't really know what to do with something like this. I mean, if you give it this, it's going to print it out and it's going to look like this. So this is just preview. Remember, this is preview in Maya. The actual object is without that smooth preview on. So now this is the actual object, and this is how it's going to look when you print it out in a platform like Shapeways. I'm going to stop this lesson because the next lesson I'm going to show you how to export and get into Shapeways to check. Okay, so that concludes the modeling session of this course, and in the next lesson we will continue to talk about the process and the pipeline of getting your models into a platform, 3D printing platform like Shapeways. All right, so I will see you in the next lesson. Thanks.